I suppose the mindset of no one individual can be bigger than the company. The company's needs has to come first, and you always try and accommodate people and you try and make things good. But ultimately, if somebody's got an agenda and they're not prepared to do what is for the greater good, then unfortunately you can sometimes end up with some collateral damage, and it's a shame because sometimes people have been with you a long time, but ultimately we have to change, don't we? If we don't change and evolve, then we'll never grow.
Welcome to the Property Funder podcast. I'm your host, Michael Dean. You can find me on the internet at property_funder. We're back again with Lucy Waters for part two of our chat with her. Lucy is the managing director of Aria Finance, and we've been learning a lot about her story. Where we left things off, Lucy, was you just done a minority sale to private equity. It wasn't quite going according to plan. What were the next steps, and how did the merger with Enterprise come about?
So before the merge, we were acquired by the ENRA Group, and I think the beauty of that is that it was a specialist finance business. So they understood specialist finance. So having owners that can relate to the business and they can influence things and affect things is very different to having to explain yourself to people that don't understand it. So that was like a natural path, which was for before the merge, because the merge was only in 2022. For the sort of 4 or 5 years prior to that, we ran as completely competing businesses with Enterprise. So we were in Gerrards Cross, which is where our business was pre-acquisition, and we kept that office going. We didn't come into the head office at all with ENRA, and we ran them as competing businesses, which we'd sort of talked about it on and off, like, does this make sense? We're doing the same thing. Does it make sense? And it was one of those where you never know whether bringing them together is going to enhance the offering, and because you've got all the expertise coming together, is it going to make it this, super business, or are you going to lose some of the stuff around the edges because you've got two businesses that probably have slightly different strengths and weaknesses? So we toyed with the idea, and I suppose always got to, if it's not broke, don't try and fix it. Both businesses were doing well, so we left it as it was. And we did that for some time. And then COVID hit. We obviously reflected a lot on kind of what we wanted to do at that stage. And perhaps the thought of bringing them together maybe just stepped up a notch. We still weren't at the point where we thought we would do it, but it definitely stepped up a notch. And then the catalyst for it is that the guy that was running Enterprise Finance was due to step down after God knows how many years. He was originally the sales director, and he had come through the business, and he had decided, as ENRA had gone through another private equity transaction with Elliott's, he had decided that was kind of the point where he was going to move on and take early retirement. So we then had a situation where you've got two businesses and one leader of the broking businesses. So for me to run two separate entities that are competing just didn't feel like it was going to work well for anybody. So at that point we said, okay, this just makes sense now. These two businesses should operate as one. Then we had the challenge of, you've got half the business in Gerrards Cross, half the business in Watford, different cultures, sort of same products, but slightly biased towards different products in each business. So it was a little bit of a learning curve, but actually I think now that it's all settled and the dust has settled, I think it was a really good move.
Well, as a crow flies, Gerrards Cross and Watford aren't that far apart.
They're not, but the
culturally,
M25 as well, that's the other problem. You get a lot of people that live the other side.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of the Watford side of Gerrards Cross, it's no problem. But we had people that lived right over the other side. So we sort of brought people on the journey, and actually now it works really nicely. I think everyone is quite happy with the...
How do you deal with the sort of the fallout in that kind of merger? Because I guess you're going to have teams and individuals that have overlapping relationships, and and people, understandably, especially if they're in sales, being territorial at times. How did you manage that? How did you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, so year one was really challenging. Actually, it felt like the cultures had not blended well at all, and there was a lot of... they're all... I wouldn't want it to sound like we don't have really good people that care about the business when saying this, but you had people that were almost keen to point out what the other side was doing wrong, as opposed to coming together to kind of work as one. And there was a point where I thought, oh God, this doesn't feel very harmonious at all. And again, it's one of those things where you can overreact to stuff, and you can go, oh my God, it's not working, we need to change this, we need to do this, and over engineer it. Or you just keep doing the right things, keep plugging away at it, and let sort of it take its natural course. And that's basically what it did. And I would say now we've probably got the best of both cultures within the business, which is really nice. And we're now at a point where you've got lots of people that have been with either side of the business for a long time, and then we've got new Aria recruits, and it doesn't feel like there was ever two businesses. Like there was never... we don't talk about, oh, that's the Vantage lot and that's the Enterprise lot, whereas that happened a lot in the early days. Whereas now it's a lot more, everyone's working together, and I think it's definitely been a good thing for all of the people within the business to see how another business is doing it and take that best practice. Because there's a lot of times, and I don't know whether you find this in your business, but I often come across, I'll say to people, why do we do that? And they say, we've always done it. And it's one of the worst things I ever hear. And I'm like, no, I'm not asking you how long we've done it for. I'm saying, why do we do it? And often people can't answer that question. It's just like, well, we just do. It's our process. And it gives you that opportunity to ask the why, and then say, well, if nobody can think of a valid reason why that came in, and they're just doing it because they got taught how to do it when they came into the business, and therefore they've taught the next person who's taught the next person and the next person, then actually we need to look at why. And if there's no valid reason, then we change it. And they're the sorts of positive changes, I think, that come in as a result of doing that. It makes you lift up the bonnet a bit rather than just doing what you've always done.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Like you get these ingrained habits and behaviours that develop over time. And I suppose the few years that Zahara and I were a little bit step back from the business, we obviously took advantage of that to develop ourselves and learn a lot about the technology side of the things. But as we came back into the business in the summer of last year, we've slowly started to look at a lot of the things, the processes and an operational side of things, and go, well, like you said, why are we doing this? It's also, we've been lending for 10 years now, still not had a capital loss. I think actually in some ways that not having had a capital loss means that we probably not taken enough risk at times.
You could argue that. I mean, people do. It's probably a nice feeling for you not having a capital loss, but it does make you think, can we push the boundaries a bit more?
Yeah, I was actually listening to...
Not that you're aiming for a capital loss, but...
No. I'm going to give my friend Kingsley a plug, because he's just released a podcast called A Smokeless Word. He's C-suite at British American Tobacco, and he just had Rory Sutherland on. I don't know if you know Rory, but he's like he's the deputy chairman of Ogilvy, so in advertising. And Rory was saying on this episode, he said that everyone, people are so quick to kind of call people out for. He used the example of he was driving along the A40, and there was a petrol station, and it was at night time, and it didn't have its lights on, but it was open. And he said that was probably costing the owner of that garage probably £1,000 an hour in sales. And he said that the guy who was behind the guy who's running the petrol station at the time, if he'd nicked a Lion bar, the example he uses, if he nicked a Lion bar, he'd have been hauled over the coals. But but the fact that he was costing the business £1,000 an hour in lost sales because they didn't have the illuminations on the petrol station. And I thought that was quite an interesting. I thought that was a really fascinating analogy, and looking at it through our own context. And I think that that's one of the benefits of actually having been away from the business and coming back in, is that you get these new, fresh perspectives where you go, well, actually, we need to. Why are we doing this? What, why we're financing a bungalow development? Why are we asking for a rights of light report? Really stupid stuff. I use that as a very extreme example, and rest assured, not something that is I expect repeated. But at the end of the day, you do have to. You get an opportunity, like you say, when you had this merger of the two teams, that you can learn best practices from each of them, and actually go, well. We do it this way and we do it this way. But why do you do it this way? Why do you do it this way? Okay, well, is there something can we take the best bits of this and do the best bits of this? If you can take ego out of the equation, then which I guess that inevitably in that year one, that difficult year one phase, expression I like is that, to make an omelette, you've got to break a few eggs. You probably would have had a few broken eggs in that first year where a few individuals, bruised egos and whatnot, they had to leave the business. And
we did, yeah.
And now, thankfully, I think you probably have a much stronger business as a consequence of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Sometimes you have to make a bit of sacrifice like that. And I suppose the mindset of no one individual can be bigger than the company. The company's needs has to come first. And you always try and accommodate people and you try and make things good. But ultimately, if somebody's got an agenda and they're not prepared to do what is for the greater good, then unfortunately you can sometimes end up with some collateral damage. And it's a shame, because sometimes people have been with you a long time, but ultimately we have to change, don't we? If we don't change and evolve, then we'll never grow. Yeah,
well, it goes back to that sort of comfort zone, stretch zone and panic zone, right? So it's just finding that right slot. You mentioned on the previous episode that you're still placing cases. How do you separate working in the business versus working on the business? And is that something that remains a challenge for you, a struggle for you, as someone who likes to be very hands-on?
Do you know, I think they intertwine daily. So I don't think there's no system. There's not like, right, today I'm having a day where I work on, working on the business, and today I'm going to just talk to clients. It's a case of I kind of just do what is there. So I've got things that will be going on day in, day out. So you kind of manage all of that, but you're always thinking. So if something needs doing, then you just sort of step out of what you're doing to deal with it. And you have to be a bit reactive as well as proactive. So I've actually never found that balance difficult, because I just think they're so linked. And I've never really loved the idea of just having loads of leaders and managers in a business that don't write business, because I think you can get quite heavy cost base through doing that without having the return on it. And yes, you can argue that these people create a return in a different way, but often it's much harder to measure, whereas I do quite like measurables. And I just think that you come in the morning, and if you have the mentality of you just want to get through as much as possible and influence as much as possible, you see you're close to the ground, so you see what needs to be done in front of you, and you just, I don't know, it becomes quite intuitive, I think.
No, I think that's a fair point, and I guess from a brokerage perspective, you do need to, I suppose it's your ethos as well, as you like to operate a lean business. And actually, I mean, even some of the biggest American law firms, you still have the senior partners there billing 2,000 hours a year. So in that context, it's not that unusual anyway. So I think that makes a lot of sense. What do you see the future for Arya going forwards? Obviously part of the ENRA Group still. Is there a future where Arya is no longer part of ENRA, or is the idea for Arya to acquire other brokerages to broaden the footprint, or are there other service lines that like insurance or something like that you're looking to go in?
Yeah, I think adjacent products is always something that we're looking at. And actually, acquisition is something that, in terms of us making acquisitions, that's something that we're always open to as well. There's a lot of good businesses out there. One thing that I do see is that a lot of our competitors have a lot of key man risk, and a lot of the people that want to sell, it's linked to their own exit. So sometimes the idea of it is great, but then you start looking at them and you realize that there's not much that can be done because they are the business.
Yeah.
But there's definitely something in that, and I think that that's something that we'll continue to keep an eye on, because I think the market could do with a little bit of consolidation. It's gone very fragmented, in my opinion, and I've seen so many people rush to start specialist arms, and it's in a difficult market. Every part of the market is difficult. It's not like specialists is the golden goose. Transaction levels are down. They're down across the whole market, not just in residential mortgages. But it's definitely led to more people either branching out or trying to branch out into our world. But I think there's areas of the business that we could probably grow, that we have sort of a lower base in. So we do residential mortgages, but it's not a huge part of what we do. And then we've looked at some adjacent products as well, like business funding and unsecured funding and things like that. So I think that probably is a natural next step for us. And I think there's a huge opportunity in the market generally. And we're very well placed in the high net worth space, which I think puts us in a really good position, because obviously you have to do less transactions to get to the sorts of volumes that you want to get to, and that's somewhere that we've carved out a real success for ourselves. So there's a lot more to do, and I think there's a lot more growing to be done. So we're by no means a case of right, we're done now, we'll just bob along. And I think the nature of our ownership is that it's a very ambitious and entrepreneurial business, so the expectations are for growth always. So standing still would not be an option for anybody. And as it stands at the moment, there is we're quite happy with the home we've got in ENRA, and I don't see that changing. We're complementary to what they do. We have a lot of shared resource, which is really beneficial for us as well. So it works well.
This podcast is sponsored by Avamore Capital. Avamore Capital is a development and bridging lender based in London, but lending all over England and Wales, lending on projects from £250,000 all the way up to £25 million on bridging, development, refurb and part complete developments. Please visit www.avamorecapital.com to find out more. I suppose, speaking of ENRA, the relationship with West One, what is that relationship like, and how and how much of a Chinese wall exists between the two organisations? For those, presumably you're going to be passionately trying to sell your independence to the brokers that and clients that come to you to place their cases. They obviously want to know that they're not going to. It's not all going to be funneled to West One. But how does that actually work in practice?
Yeah, so look, it's always a challenge trying to make sure that we articulate what we do, and I say articulate what we do because we do it, and we're really careful about it. And West One isn't our biggest lender. We have other lenders that we do more business with, and it depends. People will have whatever lens on it they want to. You get a lot of negativity and a lot of jealousy in the market, and ENRA is obviously a hugely successful business. So naturally with that, you will get critics, and we accept that. But generally, I think people understand that in a heavily regulated environment that we operate in, even if we had the will to put it all to West One, it would be impossible for us to justify doing that, because you have to do what's right for the end client. And so from a sort of more day-to-day level, we have to make sure that every case that goes to West One has more of a justification attached to it than what you would in a normal scenario. So our advisors are checked on 100% of the cases that go to West One in terms of their sourcing rationale and the reason why
it's almost
gone
like
there.
For a deal to go to West One from you guys, it almost has to pass a higher threshold.
It does. Yeah.
As a consequence of that.
Yeah, it does. And we have to manage that conflict as a group in both directions, of course. And we have to report that to our auditors. So we have to be really careful about what we do and how we do it. And actually, one of the benefits, really, if you look at it from the other side, is that sometimes if we need something doing really quick with certainty, and the customer is aware of the relationship and everybody is aware of the relationship, we make sure that a customer always knows what other products are out there. But if somebody needs us to do something where we might have to go upstairs and sit with them for an hour to talk through something really complicated, they are in the same building as us. They're not on the same floor, which is part of the Chinese wall thing that we've ended up on separate floors. But we run as a completely autonomous business. So we're separate entities, separate floors, complete Chinese walls, and we manage the conflict. But we have the benefit as well, which is, in my opinion, it's the best of all worlds. And we have to be really transparent with people. Everyone has to know where we sit and what West One is to us. And I think as long as we manage that properly, it's a benefit and not much else.
Yeah. And look, from putting my 2 cents worth in here, I think that I definitely see the benefit of the co-location. I actually have a lot of respect for West One as an organisation. I don't know Danny personally, but I hear a lot of good things about him. So to have that to be able to sort of knock on the door and say, look, can I ask this, or can I get a view on that?
It's a quicker route, isn't it? It's where it might take a few phone calls, Teams meetings, documents,
and it only benefits the client. So I totally see the logic in that. In terms of going to maybe a bit more of a general line of questioning now. How do you see the market playing out for the rest of the year? I suppose in the specialist space.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I mean, I think from what we're seeing, activity levels have really picked up. So we came into the year really strong, and we had a really strong Q1. It tailed off a little bit, which has fed into a more challenging Q2. Like we're doing well, but I feel like the momentum that we had in Q1 just dropped off a little bit in Q2. And what we've seen is huge new business numbers over the last maybe 6-8 weeks. And I feel like that demand has been sat there through all of this. And the conversations that our advisors are having day in, day out with, should I hold off? Are interest rates going to go down? And, we think we're going to see more base rate cuts, or I'm going to wait to see what the news is of the next Bank of England meeting. And I think now there's a better education from customers, and sometimes you have to talk to them again and again and to explain that actually that base rate cut, that's already been built in. So you've had the benefit of that because everyone really knew it was coming. So I think that the demand has been really pent up for some time, and I feel quite optimistic about the rest of the year. I think we're going to come into a really strong Q3, and we've probably just learnt to live with interest rates a bit now, whereas before I don't think everybody was prepared to acknowledge the fact that this is where we are now. We are not going to see interest rates anywhere near where they were. I think everyone thought that was the norm, but actually it was completely not the norm. And we're not in a bad place interest rate wise. Cost of borrowing isn't horrendous. We went through a phase where it was horrendous and people found it hard to stomach that, especially on a longer term basis. Probably in what you guys do, it's better because people are looking at it over shorter period, but it obviously impacts land values, it impacts resales and all the things that influence your decision making when doing a loan, which I guess has a knock-on effect. But it does feel like the activity's there and people want to get going.
Well, I think just to respond to your points, I think that one of the biggest issues has probably been around around land values. I think that the sales has an impact because developers who've got money tied up in schemes, the value of their equity is either stuck or the value of their equity continues to get eroded by double-digit interest rates, effectively. So that's problematic because it's harder to get equity out to go and put it into new schemes. But developers being developers, they find Bob down at a golf club who gives them half a million quid, and they find a way of getting it done. But I think the bigger issue probably for the last 2 years has been on land values and vendors' expectations, right?
It's and crazy, isn't it?
So I think but where we're seeing a bit of flexibility there is that vendors are then effectively putting in deferred payments or deferred considerations into deals, whether that's by way of like an overage or whether it is effectively putting in the balance of their expectations versus what the developer's willing to pay, and putting that balance in maybe as a second charge or something like that. And we've been used to doing that for years, so that's fine. We're happy to do that. So I think that to your point, and obviously I'm going to ask you now, be interested to see if it's what sort of client profile we're talking about. But certainly on the developer side, we're definitely seeing our activity levels picking up, and our live pipeline is growing. It's it's probably the biggest it's been for some time, both in terms of the count but also the volume as well.
The value has been a massive thing, and I don't know whether you felt this, but we've gone through some stages over the last couple of years where our value has been really on the floor, and there's been a couple of instances over the last 12 months where we've completed very similar unit numbers to what we normally would, but our value is literally down there. And I think that's because some of the more serious clients are sitting on their hands, so you still get some of the churn business, but you're not seeing so much of that high value stuff where there's obviously more risk in getting the numbers wrong, and people have been a little bit more cautious.
I think there's a geographic component to it as well from our perspective, which is that so when you talk about the interest rates, of course, and buy to let, you do turning the clock back 3 or 4 years, we would be very London and South East heavy, and a lot of our clients they wouldn't be exiting on sales, they'd be exiting on buy to lets. And buy to let could be viable in a super low interest rate environment in Greater London. Because even if your debt, we're like, well, look, okay, you've got a debt yield of 6% on our facility, they'll easily exit that on a buy-to-let facility. Now we sort of feel like if it doesn't have a debt yield of 7, which not to say it's impossible. You'd correct me in a heartbeat because I know it's not impossible, but certainly it's less viable. And if you're the developer, do you really want to sit on a reversionary yield of 4% after having spent 100, 200 grand on a refurb? Probably not. So we're tending to find the geographical component of it is much more northern based because and HMO focused. And so the counterpoint to that though is if you're further north, the values are just lower. So it just means the ticket sizes are lower. So that's certainly our anecdote, if you know what I mean. So
and maybe you're right, and it's something that we probably don't track as well as we should, and probably not as well as you in the businesses is sort of asset location. So we'll have an anecdotal idea on that, and some of it will be that some of your bigger clients aren't doing as much, and they're not doing as much because that's the area they do it in, and actually that makes a lot of sense. So it's not actually just that the bigger clients aren't doing it because they're worried, but actually perhaps they're just not finding the deal flow to stack up, and that does make a lot of sense. And we are seeing a lot of HMO. We're actually seeing a lot more really big HMO stuff as well, like the more co-living-y type things now, which obviously comes with its own challenges because the valuations of those, everyone has a really different view on how to value them, and if you start trying to do a more bricks and mortar approach on some of those, then they just simply don't stack up. So a lender has to really understand them, and some do, some don't, and then you have to get the valuer on board as well, which is a whole nother challenge in itself.
I agree with that. I think one of the other issues with going a bit further outside of what I would call our traditional home of like London South East and like maybe just sort of south of sort of Seven to the Wash, shall we say? Although I suppose we dispelled that some time ago. But one of the challenges there is that you don't have the professional panel. You don't have the depth of relationship and experience of the professional panel that you historically did. So then you're then reliant on new firms of valuers, for example, and you do have it, which does lead to a slightly broader range of outcomes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When we've just had a valuation done on something which is sort of in the south of England for a large HMO, and we've been given by this valuer, who isn't somebody I know, something like a 15% yield, and I've not seen any HMOs with a 15% yield. I'm not saying they're wrong, but it
doesn't sound right.
It doesn't sound right, and the client's furious, and there's, once a valuer's put pen to paper, there's very little you can do to change their mind, because they just don't like to admit that they got it wrong in the first place. And it's especially if you have limited lenders that you're working with for that type of product. So if your lender pool's quite small already because it's quite a niche product, and then you burn a lender because you get an awful valuation like that, and you can't go to the people who have the right experience, then you've kind of put one lender to the wayside, and then you have to try and find someone else in a narrow pool of lenders, which that's a less fun part of the job, I think.
Yeah, and not only that, even if you do find another lender, you've got to persuade the client to fork out another £3,000 or £4,000 on a valuation. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's not a conversation. Well, I think you're probably better at that conversation than I would be. So, no. But are you, in terms of the spread of product types that you're working on at the moment, or you're seeing the growth, you feel like the growth is going to come from in the next 12 to 18 months. Is that do you think that's will that a lot of that come from the regulated side in terms of the owner occupiers, or is that going to be mainly from I suppose the HMO investors, the buy-to-let investors and the developer types?
I think the unit number growth might come from the regulated side, but the value where it's most influenced is on the unregulated, the development finance, bigger commercial stuff. And I think we're doing a lot of PD conversions again, whereas that had tailed off again a little bit, but we're starting to see a lot more of that type of business come through.
And what's driving that, do you think?
Do you know, I wonder again if it could be vendor value expectations, because I speak to customers who are refinancing commercial buildings, and they say, but this was valued at 2 million in 2020. So have a look at where interest rates were in 2020. So what yield would have to be applied to that? Your rent's the same because your tenants have been in there. That nothing's changed on rents. So the value expectations, especially where you've got funds that are selling off assets where they might have bought it at like I don't even know what they were buying at, 4% yield. Whatever it was,
4 to 6 maybe,
and now they're now it might be 7 to 9 or something like that, and it's that I think has been quite difficult from a mindset perspective, whereas you probably get to a life cycle in a fund where they go, well, we're going to have to just cut our losses now and sell it on. So we do have quite a few clients that have bought from funds, and we know that they've sold for considerably less than what they bought it for several years prior. So it could be the same thing, the sort of land values, if you like, vendor expectations. Yeah,
for sure. I think just from our experience as well, I think what you're saying, that land price component is definitely something that I think is a big factor. I think the other component is that new build is really expensive and really difficult at the moment. When we talk to developers who do ground up developments, especially larger ones, and they are showing a much stronger preference to go down the PD conversions or office to resi or commercial to resi.
Is that construction costs or availability of labour? Or
I think it's a combination of everything actually, and I think also there's probably some fire reg stuff as well, like regulatory components, building regs, like
BSR.
Yeah. But but one of the things we're going to start to probably find as an issue with the taller buildings is, so anything over 18 meters is the gateway 2 applications. And so effectively the applications that the developers are going to have to make.
7 stories, isn't it? One or the other.
And it takes and the applications are being processed so slowly. So a lot of developers are just going, I'm just not touching anything of any height.
So I have a really good client I've worked with for many years, and we did a development exit loan for them in June last year, which is just coming up to expiry now. And they had exchanged on the whole building. This was like a £20 million loan, and they'd exchanged on the whole building pretty much. And their building control firm went into administration.
Oh yeah, I know this. Yeah.
So if your building firm, if they went into, if your building control firm went into administration, you then got lumbered into the BSR queue, and they got overwhelmed with applications. And this client who thought they were going to be out of the bridge in a matter of weeks, because they'd done it all, they were pretty much ready to be signed off.
Yeah.
They are now 12 months down the line, and it has been the most stressful experience. And we never thought we would be at the point where we were talking about having to extend their facility through, by the way, no fault of their own. They have delivered on everything we have ever done for them. They are so sharp as clients. And I've had a conversation with them where they've just said, we will not touch a building that is over 7 stories, 18 meters. We're just not, we're going nowhere near it, because we just can't go through this. We can't take the risk of going through this. And lots of people that have been in that situation have gone to the wall because of it.
For sure.
And then you've got Keir Starmer talking about penalising developers for not building enough houses. And then you've got this happening where people can't move into their houses because they can't get building control sign off. So it's a bit of a joke, really, isn't it?
Well, I think you take it a step further, which is that with the aspirations, the government's aspirations to build 1.5 million new homes, if you can't build, and they want to build it on brownfield sites. If you're on a brownfield site or you're in an urban site, you've got to go up, right?
Yeah.
That's the only way you can actually, create that density. But then if you've got this as acting as this huge, I guess, brake on development, it's like, well, it's
if they don't change something,
yeah,
then they're just not going to achieve it. They have to look at the process.
No, I think that's entirely right. In terms of dealings with lenders, do you think that there are too many lenders at the moment? Do you think we talked about consolidation in the brokerage space, but do you think there are too many lenders as well?
Honestly, yes, I do.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit. There's like similarities with pre-financial crisis, where there's lenders springing up all over the place. The market's been quite hard as well, so it does beg the question whether there is space for everybody, especially if everyone's trying to do the same thing. I love it when you see a lender that comes up with something really niche-y, and I think you guys did that when you came in, didn't you, with your finish and exit product, because that's actually something that a lot of lenders shy away from. And it's really difficult because I always try and give people time, like if people call but we get so many of them, it's just countless people contacting us. And it's really hard because you've got lenders that have supported you through thick and thin and have pulled the stops out to deliver for you, and that you've been able to rely on over the years. So the choice to move business away from those lenders that have supported you to support somebody that's just picked the phone up to you and is saying they can do a great job, that's a really hard argument, isn't it? Whereas if someone picks the phone up and says, do you know we can do this, this and this? And you're like, oh, wow, actually, that's quite innovative. But there's innovation within the realms of any sort of sensible lending. It can only go so far.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
And everyone talks about innovation, and yes, it's great, but I think if you were to ask brokers, what does innovation look like? What would be niche? Or 100% loan to value, and they'd give you a wish list of entirely unrealistic things.
Yeah, so 4% proc,
yeah, exactly. And you have to. That's it. You can only do what's sensible to avoid your business suffering capital losses or worse. And ultimately, people are not going to go into the realms of stupidity to try and chase volume. And there are some lenders that probably fly a little bit too close to that. And actually, whilst brokers may see it that it's good for them because they can get business away, we actually like longevity. Like, we want lenders that are going to be here in 10 years' time. And that have been here, and obviously everyone has to start somewhere. So we have no issues with new entrants, and we'll support people if we think that there's a product there and they're going to be a good lender for us to deal with. But at the same time, the market's only so big, right?
Yeah, I think there's an element of truth to that. A lot of lenders, when a lot of new lenders set up, especially ones who naturally gravitate towards bridging, and someone says, "What's your USP?" and they go, "Speed." It's
I know. It's like, and the rest.
Although someone's recently said to me that he actually thinks that the speed at some bridge lenders operate now, he thinks he can actually get a term loan done quicker. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think the biggest example of that is where you have term lenders that go into short-term funding. Yeah. I think the other way around is different, and actually I think the other way around is probably a much nicer transition, because they have that mentality of trying to get deals paid out quickly for people, whereas you find that a lot of term lenders that go into short-term funding, they underwrite it in the same way. So you're right. Why, if a term lend is available aside from speed, then you probably wouldn't choose one of those lenders. Whereas if it is all just rate driven and the client's got all the time in the world and they never want a term loan because their plan isn't to hold it for a term, then okay, there's a place for those lenders as well. But actually, you get some horrendous experiences with some lenders that are playing at short-term finance.
Well, we're sort of winding things down now. So last couple of questions from me, Lucy. But have you've obviously had a still very still very young, but you've had a pretty storied career already. Along the way, presumably you've had some pretty influential figures and characters. Are there any people that that really stand out in your mind as having been important influences on the journey along the way?
I've met some really amazing people along the way. I mean, you take little bits from different people, and there's some lenders in the market that have done exceptionally well, and obviously, ENRA's an obvious one, and the relationship with Danny as the CEO, he's obviously had an incredible journey. So it would be remiss of me not to mention that, because I think in terms of success stories, ENRA is very much up there. Aside from that, I've enjoyed a really long working relationship with Shawbrook Bank, and historically Stephen Johnson, who obviously is no longer with them, he's somebody that I really enjoyed working with for many years. And then as my relationship with Shawbrook grew, there were other people within the business, Karen Bennett and Emma Cox, and all of them, like I say, you take different bits from all of those people that they do really well, which I think you can then apply to some of the things that you do. So I think like pieces of everybody, but there's some good people in our market.
Yeah, well,
sure.
I guess with your natural curiosity, you'll be like a sponge, and anything good you're going to be like just grabbing that and go, how do I use that to my own advantage? So that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the final question and the closing tradition is, if you were to give your younger self some self-talk, knowing what you do now, what would you advise yourself and why?
I would say probably to not sweat the small stuff so much. I think I've definitely been guilty of that over the years, and you can waste a hell of a lot of energy worrying about things that don't actually really move it in either direction. And I'm quite a detailed person, so sometimes I think going too far into the weeds can be detrimental to growth in some ways. So I think there's a balance to be had for sure, because I think, as I've said before, having some technical knowledge is obviously important, but I do think having the ability to not sweat the small stuff would be something I'd have liked to have had over the years.
Nice bit of advice, and definitely, I definitely could take that on board myself, and I certainly know other friends and colleagues in the industry would definitely benefit from that advice as well. Lucy, you've been a brilliant guest. It's been fascinating getting to know you a little bit. Where can people find you on the internet if they want to reach out?
So I've got my LinkedIn, Lucy Waters. We are now on Instagram as well. We've been doing a bit more of the socials. So you can find me on Lucy Waters Finance. And then we've got our website, Aria Finance. And yeah, that's about it.
Nice. Well, please get in touch with Lucy, and if you want to talk to her about anything that she's been talking about today. Otherwise, if you want to get hold of me, you can find me on the internet at property_funder. Many thanks, as always, to Avamore Capital for their continued sponsorship and support. And we'll talk to you again on the next one. Thanks, and bye-bye.